Hello. Obviously, I will be speaking in Australian or English for this talk. But, you know, architects rely on images. And I have a lot of images, but hopefully some of what I say will make some sense about practicing in a different place and having a different education and a different mode of practice that I do in Australia. I'm quite rare in Australia and perhaps in the world as I work as an architect and a builder at the same time. So, and this happened through my education and my university training that was in a place of art and construction. So very early I started making buildings. This first image is my final year project, age 23, 24. That was a building that I made for myself and transported to site. I built it in the university and transported the building to site that was at a friend's place where I built this plywood shed, and you can see the drawings. My presentation drawings are on the plywood. Then I folded the plywood. There's the section. There's a plan below. Back in the days when watercolour pencils were fashionable. And that was the beginning. I was working in a timber and hardware store at the same time. But I was studying architecture and I was also travelling the world. So I came to Europe in my early 20s and spent a year here travelling. So I think it's interesting Australians travel a lot. So we're not without cultural influence from many places, be it Europe or the Americas or Southeast Asia. So it becomes a very interesting place to practice. That's almost as far as the building got before it fell down. You can see a little Rietveld Schroeder chair, the red-blue chair in there that I was making at the time for friends to sell. Obviously that's illegal. I wanted to show a couple of projects first up, and then I'll go into some of the projects in detail. As an architect and builder, I've travelled a lot around the east coast of Australia building buildings. And I looked at, you know, the map of France and the map of New South Wales, and they're of similar size. And so to understand my day-to-day is to understand that I would work all around France, travelling top to bottom in all different parts of the geography and in the environment. So the first projects, I'm just going to give you a kind of a taste for working in the Sydney suburbs in a building that's out of recycled materials, wholly recycled from the site. So there's issues of recycling and make do. I'll skip through these. One of my early projects, my first project after the one that you saw, age 26, was to build a private library for a girlfriend's dad in the Blue Mountains. So this is a couple of 100 kilometres away from the first project, and it's about prospect, or the view into the distance. It's sort of before I knew what architecture was, and it's also when I cut my teeth or learnt how to build. All of the building was built out of the local hardware store by myself and another architecture student. It looks terrible today. It's falling apart. But it was really a building designed, and this may come through in some of my other work, about one idea. I'm a very quick and simple concept designer, and I believe in executing the design and executing the building so that it happens quickly. One idea, build building. Very simple. And the idea in this building is really about the section or the ergonomics of the building, and building a really big bookshelf. So the back bookshelf has, I think, 15,000 books in it, and we wanted to build the biggest bookshelf outside the sort of the state library. So a really big bookshelf, ladder to access it, defines the building completely. This is another building out. We had all these, this is one of my first jobs in my late 20s, out in the suburbs or out in the new bush suburbs in Australia, where Australia just keeps spreading from the cities. And there's so much space and so much land that so many times I would end up with a client up a dirt road, and looking at a patch of bush, and they would say, yep, that's it, from there to there. And it was just like, oh, okay, what will happen next? So this was the first house in a suburb with no other houses, no other reference, and all I could think to do was just close on either side, close the brickwork on either side, box out the back, and point forward. Open space opening to deck. First house in a suburb. I think one of the kind of reasons that I'm here, and Karim had sort of said, well, he didn't know why I was here, was for a house that I did in Sydney for myself. And it is a fusion between Southeast Asian architecture, I think, and modernism, or where Australian architecture is at now. So it's this strange house of indoor and outdoor and operability, but controlled spaces. It's still suburban. It's in a very busy suburb. It's 10 minutes from the centre of Sydney, but it has a sense of privacy. We'll get back to that. Luckily in Australia, there isn't that much heritage in the building fabric. And so you get to do a lot of alts and ads where you can really rip the building apart. So a lot of my work, early work, would be alts and ads where we call it box out the back, where we tear the back off the building and open it up, reverse the plan, and try and correct the plan so that it becomes about light and orientation. This is another building somewhere else. But it's here to talk about one idea, which is reading the brief, and the client is literally the brief says 3-bedroom, 2 bathrooms, etc., and I'm a classical pianist. And so for me, the building became this acoustic shape, and the piano sits in the back corner, and it projects sound out into the landscape and throughout the building. So the whole roof structure is something that projects the sound throughout the building. Other operable bits, then you'll start to see, and this is here to start to talk about something at the end, which is my fascination of detail. So as an architect and builder, you execute plan, section and elevation, but then because you are on site, the detail starts to become something else. And for me, the detail is always the syntax, the grammar of the construction and the architecture, where once you start to be able to control your grammar as the detail, you can do anything with the building. So, playful. This is a cliff house or a container house or Wild West Australia. This is a house that has no approval. It still happens in Australia. You know, clients come to you with a lump of money and a block of land and say, look, I just want to build this or something. I don't care if council know or don't know. Let's build it. So this is a unapproved dwelling made out of containers in the thought that it might be movable, possibly not. This is on an island 1,000 kilometres north of Sydney, where I generally live but didn't grow up. And it's a tropical house. It's 3 pavilions, and pavilions are a big thing in Australia, where we build these buildings across the landscape, very simple buildings that follow the contour. And it has, the object of the building was to have no internal corridors. So they're all external spaces, undercover, and you go from one building to the other. 10 years later, then, or 20 years later, you build the $5 million, $10 million version, where, as work gets bigger, you build bigger things. So I'll go into a little bit of detail. I did these sketches this morning. And what I'm trying to show is that, or what I found out this morning, is most of my work focuses on an external space. So the key space is an external space. And it might be covered or uncovered, generally covered, because I believe in protecting people from the sun, particularly in Australia, and having the skin that I do, that is now destroyed after 50 years of being out in the sun. This is a plan of the building you will see, and it's a strange plan. Tighter the lines is internal, more open lines are external, and the dot dash, which I had to come up with this morning, is it might be one or the other. So living in Australia, Southeast Asia is sort of the gateway to Asian architecture, be it from Japan, for refined modernism, to something more difficult and tropical. Angkor Wat in Cambodia is a real touchstone place for me as we look at this nature and architecture, man-made and natural. And at the time, this was 20 years ago, I thought, imagine I just had a little platform tucked in the corner of that ruin. I had the shelter, so I'd have a place to sleep, and I'd have, I don't know, some order or some enclosure and a landscape that went with it. And this would be the perfect architecture. And so I returned to Australia and thought, I will build that in my simplistic 1-0 manner that I get around with. And this was the version of that. So there's an existing house at the front, but there's a new part at the back. And everything is built to be overgrown. So it encourages the jungle. It encourages the moment where it disappears. Boxes are built to enable plants. Everything about it is to be covered and hidden and allow the natural element to cover the architecture, bring the natural shape, clean the air, and work as privacy as well. It's still a little bit of a box out the back. Natural materials or local materials that you might see in Australia. Very operable. All my work is, everything always moves. I've sailed all of my life. I like things that move and operate. I can't see why we wouldn't. There's also the sort of mystique and surprise and excitement of of architecture in a way. And the great thing about Angkor Wat is that you rise up to the temple level, and in its day, you descend down into the lotus ponds, walk across the lotus ponds, then back up into the smaller buildings. So there's an extraordinary pathway and entry into hidden spaces. I don't know what that is. I think it's a slide that's gone wrong. It's an internal shot. Everything moves. There's a door between you and the outdoor. There's linkways and covered ways, landscape in all different directions. High level of detail. The central table that is internal and external. The external moment, outdoor courtyards. And one of the things that I try to do in architecture is also take a high level of risk. And so this was my own house. And for a month of the year, it was terrible to live in. You had to go outside to go to the kitchen or upstairs to the sitting room or downstairs to the outdoor bathroom. And you would just go, oh, this is just, it's awful. I think I'll just go out for dinner. But the moments when everything is open became so much more fantastic. And it's also, you know, it's a table for 20, indoor and outdoor. The screen at the back, great filtered light, natural sunshade. This is the north elevation, everything operable behind it. You know, my favourite facade. And this is 20 years ago, you know, before growing things on buildings became incredibly popular. That's the door open. Kids outside, adults inside, or reverse when it comes to dinner time. Details everywhere. And this was my office for 10 years. This was just up in the roof space, trying to make a fabulous, curvaceous space, trying to get the people that I work with. I'm carpenter by trade, really, but really trying to push his bending ply as far as you could go. You know, this is a month's work. You know, this is 1 sheet per day type install for great carpenters. Little reference back to Angkor Wat. I don't know if anyone's been there, but it has all this textured work on the stone that, you know, you really need to touch and feel. This was done as an experimental thing, wallpapering the formwork, pouring concrete against it. Another gate that moves with a plant that's in it, but the galvanising really killed the plant. Never really worked. A very poor shot of an outdoor bathroom, and it was one of those dot dash things in my plan. But the main bathroom was an outdoor bathroom. Interiors. So the linkway between the 2 pavilions. And the roof over the top there's a concrete sort of apron, but then there's an extension to the roof that you'll see, which was added on because the concrete wasn't wide enough. Too much weather was getting in, so we added some more bits onto it. And there was an existing cottage at the front. Roof gardens, details, chains. All right, on to something else. It's a tiny little cabin. And it's kind of something that I show to students in a way. I think I was still in my late 20s when I did this. And I knew it was a dream project. Both of the clients were artists. And the first sketch I sent to them, they said, that's really boring. So I did another sketch that was this sort of Mondrian box in the landscape. And they said, well, now we're onto something. So I said, well, this is the opportunity to build, you know, something bizarre in the landscape. And so we built this little box, carried all the materials up into the site, up a dirt road again. We camped on site. It was one of those sort of extreme things where I ended up spending more time on site than the clients ever did, just trying to build the building. I have another small thing about every colour in the Australian landscape exists and they can be abstracted into the building. So I really like to play with that. And it was, of course, based on this, on the Rick Schroeder house, you know, where I'd been knocking off the chairs for years, building them for friends and, you know, the little round side table, that's very hard to build and is very kind of wobbly. You know, there's no material that makes it stiff. And the actual Schroeder chair, you know, it's so close to being a stackable chair. It just literally folds over. But I'll show a lot of images of buildings where, you know, I look back and I know that I've been thinking about it in the past as I execute the project. And then when it's finished, I have all these regrets, thinking, God, I wish it was more like that. And so this is the interior. You know, we have all the parts and sort of little ladders. I mean, this is a very tiny building. You know, this is 3.6 by 2.4 metres, 3.6 metres high, all constructed on site. Sleeps 4 people in 10 square metres. So, but you know, all the space is outdoor. So there's the, $200 for the chair on the right. Never got the thing on the left to work. Great building, love it so much. And I think did I have a plan of that? Yeah, who knows where that's gone. Early days for me, in that we're trying to live outside. So it's like the house I did for myself. It's very difficult to live there in poor conditions. You really have to give up on the day, stay inside, or go down to the pub, if that makes sense. Go down to the local bar. But really it's about being on the deck, having a fire, sitting on the edge in the landscape, waiting for the fire to come. It's another one. So I'd like to project the idea that being an architect in Australia, any project could happen anywhere, and it's true. This was a project, a houseboat for my plumber, who had a pontoon, and he lived on the water, and he'd been working on my buildings for 10 years, and he said, "I love your buildings. You know, I just really want one on the water." And so I thought about houseboats, and the problem with houseboats is that people get this piece of land on the water, and then they try to build to the edge and just extrude it up. And that's the problem. So there's no sunshade, there's no external space. And so the diagram is obvious, you know, that you need this external space. You need to give to the external space. You need to use budget to make external usable spaces. But I wish it had been this. So, imagine the Barcelona Pavilion on water. And I'm sure it was in the back of my mind, but we ended up with this. And I built a couple of them. You know, the colours are there, the sort of the use of material is there. You know, the detail, not quite Mesian. We have a little way to go. But we get there in 20 years' time. Simple kitchens, you know, how much does your building weigh? What can we make out of scraps? Wish it had been that. But having been on this houseboat and taken it to places on the river, it's really interesting when you're really low to the water and you can get in very close to the shore. You know, the experience is sensational, and the landscape in Australia is so untouched. It's extraordinary. Yeah, some great moments. So I've done a couple of these. You know, in the backside of sort of being an architect and builder, there are all these other projects where you build things for other people. You know, I was thinking about it the other day that these are only the projects, and all architects are the same, and all architects should be recognised and thanked for all the work that they do, for all the projects that never make it to a photo because the client, you know, was an arsehole. You know, you ran out of money, you stuffed up the job, whatever might have happened. So I did a couple more of these, but then sort of lost interest. This is a big version. There's lots of rich people in Australia. You know, there's lots of land. There's great builders. This wasn't built by me. It was too far away from home. I had too many young kids at the time. It was really modelled on Katsura Imperial Villa, which I absolutely love. And it was probably my most sophisticated indoor-outdoor building. So really with every room, and always north is at the top of the page, or south. Often they're courtyard houses, but you know, this really shows the enclosed space and the outdoor space that may be covered or may be uncovered. The dots are landscape. And so it's a house for, you used to run Christie's, an art collector, and the internal corridor, that line around the inside of the building is a gallery space. So the key part is as much wall as possible, internal walkway, protected from the sun. So these walls are solid and there's awnings everywhere. All the rooms fan off that, and it's always one inside room and then an outdoor room. I think you can see the obvious references to, you know, classic big beam Japanese joinery. It's quite a big house, it's 1,000 square metres. But half of that is outside terrace, 2 bedrooms, outside terrace. Based on this, really, and the rigid nature of it, post and beam, sliding screens. Even more literal. This image could be either building, might be mine, probably is. Having that sort of access to Southeast Asia directly up from Australia, hours away or 6 hours away, is a real privilege. And as much as we're influenced by our European forefathers, you know the story of Australia, we're dominated by English history and heritage. And as architects, we, you know, I've run several Corbusian tours, you know, for students across France. You know, I know all the buildings. I have a Corb tattoo on my back, you know. But really, the appropriateness, the appropriateness of Southeast Asia for the Australian climate, you won't be seeing it. You know, the appropriateness of Southeast Asian architecture for our climate is incredibly important. Such a stunning building. You know, it's 500 years ago, still contemporary. Here's that, you know, building on a rock. This is going into a little bit of detail and kind of talking about things like bushfire in Australia, where you might hear about it, but buildings are ravaged. Anything on a site like this must get to a certain bushfire rating that is extreme. So we used containers, and the client wanted to use containers, and I know there's a cult of container houses around. I hate them, but you know, they're great columns. They stack well, you know, and take a lot of weight, very durable. And this is its plan. So, you know, trying to get the most out of what you can do with containers. So there's more space that's outside and covered by a big roof than there is internal space. And this would be a typical way that I might design a building, as we all do. And I laughed with Paula the other day where, you know, I've laid out the plan, that's all good, plan's done. Then we start messing around with roofs and then realise, actually, a big roof is the way to go. Skid in, away it goes. It's a building, and I think it's interesting, you know, it was $250,000, which is probably 150,000 euros, you know, 10 or 15 years ago. So it was highly economical. But, you know, we made a lot of use out of offcuts and leftovers, very simple cabanon, you know, materials. You know, that and that were supposed to go together as images if you didn't realise that. That's just saying. Inspiration from the landscape. We'll just start to kind of move towards where I think I'm at now. And that after, you know, 20 years, 30 years of practice, it's actually the location of the building, because I work diversely across Southeast Australia. It's the location of the building that is the starting point of the design process. So everything now for me is about location and orientation. So an orientation can be confusing, might be about sun, might be about view, might be about contour. But the location drives everything. And these are cicadas that have left their outer skin, which seemed a very fitting image for the building as they survive. A detailed note on this building: we were lucky, and it's about the siding that was on a sort of a cliff top, all on rock. So it's my only building that has no footings. And so all of the structure was designed on site, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about site design. You know, as it's not, I actually don't have an office and I don't run a studio. Everything is designed nowhere or on site. So, you know, the idea of the structure, let's design the structure's designed on site so that things like this can happen, where it's a very small cut, levels are taken, and the building's bolted to the rock. These are the outdoor spaces, so all of the panels slide, obviously all of the containers open, everything moves around. There's no, something about longevity, there's no external timber. In the old days, you know, I might use timber externally, but now I believe that we are caretakers for materials. And why would you put timber outside? You know, it looks fantastic, sure, but it has no longevity. You know, it cannot last. In Australia, the UV is so powerful that external timber is just nonsense. You know, all steel structure, non-flammable, high paint grade systems, very big roof that's replaceable in a 50 to 70 year changeover to protect the structure underneath. So for me, I'll talk about another building. This is a 100-year maintenance building with, if protected, a 400-year lifespan. It's a long time. Interiors, plywood, me messing around. Very kind of basic, you know, undetailed, just make it. Really basic hardware store bathroom. Off-grid, as a lot of projects in Australia are, everything is just off-grid. Solar, water, sewer, down the hill. Internal spaces. Go back to something kind of urban. It's sort of a recycled project. It's there for one reason, to show the relationship between the plan and the cross spaces. So it's a U shape, back into the suburbs, look straight ahead, look to the north, keep the outdoor space to the north, and then use the building to control it, access it, and shade it. The main thing for me really is, with these outdoor spaces, is being able to get from the sort of the left to the right. So the space might exist, but it's the side spaces that need to open up onto it, so that these doors obviously all slide back, these doors all open, and then this space that's quite small becomes a crossover space. So these spaces are linked, not by plan, but spatially linked. Great for cross ventilation. A bathroom. A lot of recycled materials, street facade, close to the facade. I haven't done too many recycled buildings, but there's also, and for me, again, architecture is about being playful. This is supposed to be fun. You know, these are all recycled weatherboards from the existing house, recycled succulents, recycled brickwork, recycled flooring. So we're playing with it. And it's an odd shape as well. So we've had, this is a house on an island, a holiday house. I don't really know the sort of the makeup of holiday houses in France, but in Australia, they're everywhere. So everyone has a holiday house on the beach, you know. I mean, a lot of people do. I mean, it is obscene, and it's an issue with the way we live and the houses that we live and the way that we share them. But this is one really low cost, sort of $300,000, $400,000, $200,000 euro Cypress house. And it's really, this one was about just 3 pavilions, no corridors. Everything is external access. Really simple, and it goes back to the post and beam structures of Southeast Asia. You'll see them intertwine and wind around the building. Made of cypress pine, which is termite proof. We have a lot of issue with termites in Australia, eating buildings. But all the spaces are external. Big roofs, because we get this, you know, crazy weather in Australia where places like Canberra in the centre of Australia, or not the centre, but the centre of New South Wales, have 40 degree, 45, 50 degree temperature range, you know, across the year. And, you know, it's part monsoon, part tropical downpour in, you know, the east coast of New South Wales where I live. So you get these, you know, incredible rains. So everything needs to be sheltered. But I love pushing people outside, being economical with space. Very handmade. Part of our thing is a team of builders that work on site. So I lived on site, lived on Stradbroke Island in the community for 6 months. Is all the joinery is handmade on site. So everything is cut to fit, which is very important for me. I'm doing a PhD of all things, so that's been going really fast. And it's about, for 20 or 30 years I've been making drawings on site, the classic sketchbook-based drawings that are terrible drawings, you know, and just lists of materials and sort of phone numbers. And I started doing a PhD based on all my detail is designed on site. So I'll show you some models later. So often I'll just do a very simple set of drawings, make a model, and we start. Then the details are worked out on site. One of my supervisors said, let's look at these botanical drawings. The way they're drawn, the way that they draw a whole ecology. So everything is in its place. And when you think about architecture and the way that we detail and draw, the way we detail is in a way a kind of ecology. You know, it all fits in together. And these drawings really show, you know, this gum nut and a beetle that might be part of a whole ecology. And then it shows them all in plan and section and bits and pieces. There's all different types of drawings, all beautiful. These are the ones I kind of like, where, you know, they're incredibly architectural. They're at scale. They've got their own notation, which we use, our own words, our own made-up words, our own numbering, our own sectioning, plan sections and elevations. This is a bit where I also teach. I don't know why I put this in, but I'm also teaching students, and I try and take them out of university and we go and build projects in the country. So we recently built this extension to a shed out in the country with 20 students, made out of bits and pieces that we found on a farm, and it's just it's guest quarters on a farm where there's already 10 buildings, and we just built another one out of, you know, the leftovers of the other 10. But yeah, great side times of doing other stuff. So part of my role at university, I've done a couple of sort of sketching tours with students around France and other places. So I decided to build myself a pochade for architecture, because all of my on-site drawing, you know, it's very hard to, you know, on site you can't sit in front of a sort of a detail. If I want to detail that corner, it's like I can't sit anywhere and I've got nowhere to put anything. So I'm working at A2 because, you know, you need to, you know, sketchbooks are too small, you know, so you need to move up in size, because if you're going to capture a whole three-dimensional world, then detail, then you need more paper. So I built this sort of pochade. Of course, I drew it first, and various variations of it. And that's in process. So my day-to-day is really managing the site. I believe that we're taught these rules of architecture about space and volume and planning and orientation, all those things that we're all taught, hopefully, at university, or learnt it the hard way. But then it is all those kind of infill details and that resolution. And for me, the easiest place to do that is on site, because it is in front of you and you can walk around it and get a perspective on it. So I'll set up and just try and resolve a detail. But what I'll do first is I draw the object first, so that I've sat there and understood what I'm doing and what I'm looking at, and try and think about what the problems are. And then this is just a piece of joinery. Then I might draw the object. Various details. So I end up, in the house that I'll show at the end, I might end up with like 300 A3s for a house, A2s. And so it's a whole compilation of the parts. This is the house I'd like to sort of talk about as a sort of final project. How are we going for time? What's the time? Well, who knows? What is the time, anyone? Karim, what's the... What's that? All right. Is that good or bad? So I build a lot of models. You know, I'm a very hands-on person. You know, I can't draw a line on a computer. So models are everything to me. These are just a series of sort of models of various things, all white card, all 1 to 100, sometimes 1 to 50, sometimes conceptual, sometimes really accurate. Sometimes I'll build a concept model, and then I'll build a model during construction that follows the building, so that I can change the model as we build, so that it's not out of date, so that I can see it and use it as a tool. The final project I want to talk about is something, a big building that I built on the south coast for the last 3 years of New South Wales, moved there for 3 years. And it's a house about a couple of things. It's really summarising my ideas about location, which it has an extraordinary geology down there, and orientation. And an image will come, but it's called Two-Point House. You know, the pavilion on the left looks up the landscape to the points, and the pavilion on the right looks out to the horizon to an imaginary point called the offing in English, which is that most distant point that you see on the horizon in the ocean. It had just gone through the bushfire process, so the site was clean, which is very typical. It also had some heritage cabins on the site that I'd renovated 10 years ago, and a fantastic on the beach, you know, incredible site, which Australia is full of. The renovation of the cabins, the outlook from the building, and then developing that idea that I briefly talked about, is that there are these sort of two pavilions. There is this space in the middle, but the important thing is the crossover between the spaces. So it's about looking one way, orientating the spaces in a particular direction, but then within the building, linking the spaces together. Very durable. This is my 500-year building. So every building I've tried to do, I've just tried to increase its longevity. So my only thoughts on sustainability or caretaking of materials is how long can I make my building last? All copper cladding, stainless steel roof, concrete with galvanised bar with deep coverage. So I'm going for 500 years on this one, except for the timber bits. They're getting some capping pieces that are going on there that are still coming. But really a lot about the geology of this building. Some of my on-site sketching, which is just about, you know, how do we deal with the timber cladding inside that the big space. Really starting to move the details into a playful and fun way. You know, really trying to make things. So I've very much got this kind of, how can we hand make details? What are our basic materials? Where do we start from a design point? I try never to buy things. Let's always make them. Obviously the handrail, deeply Scarpa influenced, but, you know, an incredible piece of, you know, construction. Really trying to pull the geology out of the site, this incredible rock. It's replicated in the colours, in the concrete, and also the way that we've laid the base formwork. So you'll see this kind of, you know, this sort of, it can be called mimicking, I don't care, of what's happening in the rock face, textured board, the sections of brass embedded into the concrete, All materials that are just trying to weather an age. It's this outdoor space. It's really about the linkway this way when the wind starts to come. And you know what's really important in Australia is the wind. So the whole east coast of Australia is just buffeted every afternoon with a sort of Mistral style winds. So you might have this space between two pavilions, but you need this glass to block the space. There's still a linkway between, but there's a space behind that that's protected. That's that linkway. Rooms, bedrooms, all buildings have them. One space internal, you know, our favourite bathroom. And this is where we really start to get into where I've ended up as an architect and builder, really obsessing with the sort of construction material and detail, where we get lost into this really over-the-top kind of construction, which, you know, I know, it really satisfies me. There's a kitchen of plate steel. It's inspired by a local shipwreck. Everything's off-grid, as per usual. Try and seamlessly detail solar panels on the roof. Cladding that lasts forever. I try to, one of the other parts of my practice, my regional practice, is when I go to a particular place, I call it the word, I mine. So I discover or look for the best possible craftspeople in that area and try and build a network where I link them all together. So they all work together as fabricators. Often we have the budgets to be able to, you know, change their lives. The brass fabricator on this building, you know, renovated his house, you know, 3 months after. But he just brought the highest level of finish to it. And then now there's a network and a map that I've left as a visiting regional architect and builder in one place to use detailing and construction to bring them all together. Basement, detail. Building, finished. That's it.